Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Virginia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're hearing this narration. The year was 1772, when Monticello stood as a testament to Enlightenment ideals amid the rolling hills of Virginia, its neoclassical architecture masking darker secrets. Thomas Jefferson, revered founding father and architect of American liberty, maintained meticulously detailed records of his life and correspondence, with one notable exception. When archaeological excavations in 1998 unearthed a hidden cellar beneath the South Pavilion, researchers discovered a collection of intimate letters spanning 3 decades between Jefferson and a woman known only as S.H. in his records. Alongside baptismal documents and locks of hair from 6 different individuals, evidence of a parallel family deliberately obscured from historical record for centuries. Dr. Eleanor Hastings, leading the Monticello Preservation Society's architectural survey, initially dismissed the anomalous readings from ground-penetrating radar as equipment malfunction until careful removal of a seemingly solid wall revealed a narrow passage connecting directly to Jefferson's private chambers. Subsequent analysis of the plaster compounds, conducted by the Virginia Historical Materials Laboratory in 2003, dated the construction to precisely 1772, with evidence of multiple renovations coinciding with Jefferson's returns from diplomatic service abroad. The room itself, measuring approximately 12 by 14 feet with a ceiling height of 6 feet 8 inches, uncommonly generous dimensions for servant quarters of the period, contained sophisticated acoustic modifications including double-walled construction filled with horsehair and cotton batting, a feature unprecedented in colonial architecture but remarkably effective at containing sound. Most telling was the discovery of a specialized ventilation system employing principles Jefferson had observed in Parisian buildings, channeling air through underground stone conduits that emerged inconspicuously among ornamental shrubbery nearly 40 yards from the main house, ensuring that even smoke from the chamber's small fireplace would disperse without detection. Dr. Hastings's final report, initially suppressed by the Monticello Historical Board but leaked to the Washington Post in 2005, concluded that the architectural evidence suggests not merely accommodation, but concealment of the highest order, employing Jefferson's considerable genius to create a space that existed simultaneously within his home and outside historical record, a physical manifestation of America's founding paradox embodied in the daily life of its most enigmatic architect. Monticello, in the early 1772s, existed as a manifestation of Jefferson's European sensibilities, its every detail meticulously documented in his extensive correspondence with suppliers of imported marble, exotic seeds for his gardens, and French furnishings that would transform the Virginia mountaintop into an Enlightenment showpiece worthy of its creator's ambitions. Estate ledgers preserved in the University of Virginia's special collections reveal the purchase of the Hemmings family in 1773 from the estate of John Wales, Jefferson's father-in-law, with a particularly revealing entry dated August 17th, noting one 4-year-old female servant, mulatto, named Sally, suitable for household duties, assigned a value of £50, a price markedly higher than other enslaved persons of similar age and gender acquired that year. A household inventory compiled by Jefferson's meticulous hand in 1774 establishes the plantation's rigid hierarchy through detailed assignments of living quarters. White overseers housed in proper cabins with glass windows and wooden floors, house servants relegated to the basement level with communal sleeping arrangements, field laborers confined to crude wooden structures in the lower quarter, yet curiously absent is any documented housing assignment for the young Sally Hemings, an omission conspicuous in its singularity among Jefferson's exhaustive records. The plantation's daily rhythm appears in account books showing rations distributed according to strict status delineations, with Jefferson's philosophical writings on natural rights and human liberty composed in the same leather-bound volumes that recorded crop yields from forced labor. Most revealing is correspondence from the Marquis de Chastellux, a French diplomat visiting in November 1774, who wrote to a fellow aristocrat in Paris. Our esteemed Jefferson maintains the peculiar American contradiction, espousing the most enlightened ideals of liberty while surrounded by those who serve him through compulsion. Though I observed with particular interest his unusual attentiveness toward a remarkably light-skinned young servant girl who attends to his private chambers, handling his most personal effects with a familiarity that suggests a position quite distinct from her fellow servants. This letter, discovered in the French National Archives in 2010, represents the earliest documented observation of the connection between Jefferson and the young Sally Hemings, whose presence would remain deliberately obscured despite her increasing proximity to the master of the house. Jefferson's appointment as American minister to France in 1784 created the circumstances that would irreversibly alter the relationship between master and enslaved, with plantation records indicating Sally Hemings, then 16, accompanied Jefferson's younger daughter Mary to Paris in 1787 as her attendant, entering a nation where the institution of slavery held no legal authority. French civil records uncovered by historian Annette Gordon-Reed confirm Sally's legal status during her 26 months in Paris. Technically free under French law, able to petition courts for permanent emancipation, yet choosing instead to return to Virginia when Jefferson's diplomatic service concluded in 1789. A decision that has perplexed historians for generations until the discovery of a remarkable document. The timing of their Atlantic crossing coincides precisely with substantial renovations to Monticello's South Pavilion, documented in Jefferson's account books, with specific expenditures for additional interior partitions and specialized fitments for private chambers in the previously unremarkable outbuilding. DNA evidence published in the journal Nature in 1998 established genetic links between Jefferson's patrilineal descendants and those claiming ancestry through Hemings, with timeline analysis revealing that Sally Hemings must have conceived her first child with Jefferson while still in Paris, returning to Virginia already carrying the physical evidence of their relationship across boundaries of race and status. The most illuminating document, discovered during a 2005 re-examination of Jefferson's papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society, remains a single unbound page written in Jefferson's distinctive hand but bearing only the initials S.H. At its conclusion, a contract of extraordinary significance outlining specific conditions. Private quarters separate from others shall be maintained with suitable appointments reflecting station. No duties requiring service to other household members shall be assigned. Education in letters and numbers shall be provided as requested, and most significantly, eventual freedom for her issue shall be granted upon reaching the age of 21 years. This remarkable negotiation, conducted by an enslaved woman still in her teens, reveals Sally Hemings not as passive victim, but as an astute strategist who leveraged her intimate relationship and knowledge of French law to secure unprecedented concessions from one of America's most powerful men, choosing to return to legal bondage with guarantees for her future children rather than remain free in France without Jefferson. A decision suggesting emotional attachments as complex as the legal arrangement that would govern their probably hidden life together at Monticello for nearly 4 decades. The autumn of 1790 marked both Thomas Jefferson's ascension to the role of America's first Secretary of State and, according to the scientific dating of artifacts later discovered, the birth of his first child with Sally Hemings, an event conspicuously absent from Monticello's otherwise comprehensive plantation records that meticulously documented the birth of every enslaved child for tax and inventory purposes. The systematic erasure of this child's existence from official documentation established a pattern that would characterize all subsequent births to Sally Hemings over the following 2 decades, creating historical gaps that would enable generations of Jefferson scholars to dismiss rumors of his parallel family as baseless slander. Archaeological excavations conducted in 2010 by a team from the University of Virginia uncovered compelling physical evidence in a small refuse pit near the South Pavilion's foundation. fragments of imported French infant clothing of exceptional quality, a silver teething ring manufactured in Philadelphia, and most significantly, a small silver pendant bearing the engraved initials T.J.H., an extraordinary find suggesting both acknowledgement and deliberate concealment of the child's paternity, with the pendant apparently discarded following the infant's early death recorded obliquely in Jefferson's personal journal as simply, "regrettable loss at home," in December 1790. Household accounts from this period reveal telling inconsistencies, with requisitions for additional linens, women's garments of unusual quality, specialized food preparations, and medicinal supplies directed to unspecified household use rather than attributed to specific residents, as was Jefferson's standard practice, supplies consistent with postpartum recovery and infant care. The most revealing document emerged from the private collection of Jefferson's descendants in 1998, a letter from Martha Jefferson Randolph to her husband Thomas Mann Randolph dated February 1791, in which she writes, "Father's uncomfortable situation continues to require absolute discretion regarding domestic arrangements at Monticello, particularly during his frequent absences on government business, and I find myself in the unenviable position of maintaining appearances before visitors, while ensuring S. receives appropriate care following her difficult confinement." This remarkable correspondence confirms not only the knowledge of Jefferson's white family regarding his relationship with Sally Hemings, but their active participation in preserving the secrecy that would protect of Sally. Jefferson's public reputation while maintaining the private arrangement that had begun in Paris and would continue throughout his lifetime, producing additional children whose existence would remain officially unacknowledged but unmistakably present within the hidden spaces of Monticello. Thomas Jefferson's presidency faced its most personal crisis on the 1st of September 1802, when journalist James Callender, a former political ally turned bitter enemy, published his explosive exposé in the Richmond Recorder, declaring to the nation that the widowed president keeps, as his concubine, one of his own slaves. Her name is Sally, and further alleging that Jefferson had fathered several children whose features and complexion revealed their parentage beyond reasonable doubt. The National Archives' comprehensive collection of Jefferson's correspondence reveals a telling absence, no direct denial of Callender's specific claims regarding Sally Hemings, despite Jefferson's vigorous responses to other political attacks, while his political surrogates launched vicious counteroffensives against Callender, highlighting his conviction for sedition, struggles with alcoholism, and eventual suicide in 1803 to discredit the accusations without addressing their substance. A methodical campaign to undermine potential witnesses emerged through correspondence between Jefferson's allies, with Madison Hemings's 1873 Pike County Republican interview, revealing that several persons who were formerly slaves at Monticello and had attempted to corroborate Callender's story found themselves unable to obtain promised manumission papers or facing renewed threats of sale after speaking with journalists. Archaeological investigations at Monticello, conducted in 2007, uncovered physical evidence of heightened security implemented precisely during this period of public scrutiny. Specialized locks manufactured by the Ferguson Company of Philadelphia, installed on the South Pavilion's concealed entrance. Window reinforcements added to previously accessible ground floor access points, and most tellingly, the addition of a secondary escape route, connecting the hidden chamber to the extensive network of storage cellars beneath the main house, modifications requiring considerable expense and revealing Jefferson's acute concern about unauthorized access to his most private domestic arrangements. Jefferson's personal accounts show substantial payments to his loyal butler Burwell Colbert during this period, with historian Lucia Stanton's analysis of household correspondence suggesting Colbert became the primary intermediary between the hidden family and the outside world, controlling all access to the South Pavilion's private chambers. The Richmond Enquirer's editor Thomas Ritchie later admitted in private correspondence discovered in 1965 that despite publishing numerous defenses of Jefferson, he had received credible verification from 3 separate sources at Monticello, confirming the presence of an unacknowledged family residing in secluded quarters, yet chose to suppress this information out of concern for the dignity of the highest office and the national interest, establishing a pattern of deliberate historical omission that would persist for nearly 2 centuries. Among the most profound contradictions of Jefferson's life emerged through evidence uncovered during Monticello's 2012 structural restoration, when preservation architects discovered a sealed wall cavity behind the South Pavilion's fireplace containing a carefully preserved collection of educational materials. Primers bearing publication dates from 1798 to 1815, advanced texts on mathematics, Latin grammar books, and philosophical works, all bearing marginalia in multiple distinct childlike handwritings, alongside corrections in Jefferson's unmistakable hand. These hidden texts, analyzed by Smithsonian specialists, contain exercises completed by at least 4 different individuals over approximately 20 years, showing progression from basic letter formation to sophisticated essay composition addressing topics including natural philosophy and constitutional theory. Monticello's financial records reveal Jefferson's systematic purchases of educational materials throughout his presidential and post-presidential periods, including duplicate copies of texts already documented in his legitimate grandchildren's possession and specialized instructional materials without corresponding recipients in the acknowledged Jefferson household. The educational content progressed through levels of complexity corresponding with the ages of Sally Hemings's children as documented through later testimonies, with Latin exercises for B.H., dated 1805, aligning exactly with Beverly Hemings's 9th year. This evidence illuminates Jefferson's extraordinary compartmentalization, publicly endorsing Virginia's increasingly stringent laws restricting literacy among enslaved people, laws he helped draft as governor, while simultaneously providing his unacknowledged children with an education comparable to the finest available to white children of Virginia's elite families. Edmund Bacon, Jefferson's overseer, inadvertently confirmed this arrangement in his 1862 memoir when describing how Jefferson spent considerable time in the South Pavilion during evening hours, often carrying books and writing materials, but instructing staff that these hours were not to be disturbed for any reason short of emergency. The educational materials quality demonstrates Jefferson's commitment to preparing these children for the freedom he had promised their mother in Paris, creating the remarkable circumstance wherein one of America's most prominent advocates for racial separation privately cultivated in his unacknowledged children precisely the intellectual abilities he publicly declared impossible for those of African descent to attain. The most compelling evidence regarding the Hemings-Jefferson relationship emerged in 1847, when historian William Gardner, researching Virginia's notable families, recorded testimonies from elderly former Monticello staff members whose collective accounts paint a remarkably consistent portrait of household dynamics deliberately obscured in official records. Israel Jefferson, who served as a house servant until emancipation, described Sally Hemings as occupying a position of singular privilege, taking meals separately from other servants, wearing garments of finer quality, and moving through the house with unusual freedom. While Mary Hemings Bell noted her half-sister Sally's striking resemblance to the late Mrs. Jefferson, so remarkable that visitors sometimes appeared startled upon encountering her in the hallways. Multiple witnesses independently described children associated with Sally who possessed the master's auburn hair, distinctive Jeffersonian features, and remarkable aptitude for learning unusual among the enslaved, with former cook Ursula Granger recalling how these light-skinned children were never assigned to field labor nor addressed in the manner of other slave children. These testimonies, published in Gardner's 1851 Domestic Arrangements of Virginia's Founding Families, provoked immediate backlash from Jefferson's white descendants, who orchestrated what family correspondence reveals as a coordinated campaign to discredit the witnesses, with Thomas Jefferson Randolph dismissing them as unreliable Negro testimony corrupted by abolitionists, while successfully pressuring the University of Virginia to remove Gardner's work from its library. Most significant among the accounts was that of Edmund Bacon, Jefferson's trusted white overseer for nearly 2 decades, whose position and race made his testimony particularly difficult to dismiss. On 3 occasions after returning late from Charlottesville, I observed Mr. Jefferson instructing a light-skinned boy in mathematics at his study desk. Though it was well past the hour when household staff had retired and no legitimate family members were present at Monticello at that time. When pressed by Gardner regarding the boy's identity, Bacon reportedly replied, "I value my reputation too dearly to speak plainly on the matter, but will say only that certain things at Monticello were understood never to be discussed outside its walls, particularly matters concerning the South Pavilion's occupants." This rare white confirmation of both the children's existence and Jefferson's personal involvement in their education lends exceptional credibility to accounts systematically erased from historical record for over a century. Within hours of Thomas Jefferson's death on the 4th of July, 1826, his grandson and executor Thomas Jefferson Randolph initiated what archival evidence suggests was a calculated purge of specific documents from Monticello, with household servant Isaac Jefferson later recalling young Master Randolph removing several leather-bound volumes and loose papers from the cabinet in the master's bedroom before any other family members had arrived for the funeral. This hasty document removal represents the first stage of a multi-generational effort to sanitize Jefferson's legacy through selective preservation of his papers, creating a curated historical record that would serve the family's preferred narrative. Analysis of Jefferson's surviving papers by documentary historians reveals conspicuous chronological gaps in his otherwise fastidious correspondence, with periods of documentary silence corresponding precisely with the time frame surrounding the births of Sally Hemings's children, most notably complete absences of personal correspondence for January-March 1790, August-October 1795, May-July 1798, and December 1804, February 1805, periods when household accounts nonetheless showed Jefferson in residence at Monticello. The most definitive evidence of deliberate historical manipulation emerged in 1997, when the Virginia Historical Society acquired a previously unknown letter from Randolph to his cousin Francis Epps dated March 17, 1832, in which he writes, "I have completed the necessary removal of certain household documents from grandfather's papers prior to their transfer to the university collections, ensuring protection of his reputation from scurrilous attacks. Matters of purely domestic arrangement at Monticello being of no legitimate scholarly interest." This extraordinary admission confirms what manuscript specialists had long suspected, a coordinated effort to create historical gaps that would later be exploited by defenders of Jefferson's legacy, including prominent historians like Henry Randall, who wrote in his 1858 biography that the absence of any documentation regarding these scandalous allegations in Jefferson's exhaustively preserved papers should conclusively settle the matter in favor of the great statesman. Historian Annette Gordon Reed has characterized this systematic erasure as perhaps the most successful act of historical manipulation in American historiography, creating artificial evidentiary voids that established plausible deniability despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Among Jefferson's most revealing actions were the manumission papers granted to Sally Hemings's 4 surviving children, Beverly, Harriet, Madison, and Eston, documents exceptional both for their rarity, as Jefferson freed only 8 enslaved people during his lifetime, and for their calculated ambiguity, with each freedom certificate studiously avoiding any acknowledgement of paternity, while employing identical language designating the recipients as having rendered faithful service at Monticello. Virginia court records confirm these manumissions occurred precisely as each child reached the age of 21, fulfilling exactly the terms established in the Paris Agreement decades earlier, and providing irrefutable evidence of Jefferson's adherence to that private contract with Sally Hemings despite its lack of legal standing under Virginia law. The subsequent disappearance of these freed children into white society emerges through meticulous census research conducted by historian Joshua Rothman, who traced Beverly and Harriet Hemings to separate locations in Pennsylvania and Ohio, where 1,852 records list them as white citizens with prosperous circumstances, skilled professions, and no documented connection to their Monticello origins. Monticello's financial records reveal unexplained disbursements in the years preceding their departures, some substantial enough to establish independent households but recorded under vague designations such as miscellaneous settlements and channeled through Jefferson's trusted overseer Edmund Bacon, who later acknowledged assisting certain young people from Monticello in establishing themselves elsewhere with suitable resources. The most extraordinary document emerged decades later, when the Pike County Republican published Madison Hemings's remarkable first-person testimony in 1873, in which he definitively states, "Thomas Jefferson was my father," before providing unprecedented details about life in the hidden apartments at Monticello where my mother maintained separate quarters from other servants, according to the agreement made in Paris before my birth. This extraordinary account describes how Jefferson would visit our rooms daily, taking great interest in our education and development, though maintaining strict divisions between his acknowledged and unacknowledged families, with Madison further recounting his mother's description of the Paris negotiation. She told me often how Master Jefferson had promised her exceptional treatment for herself and freedom for her children, and though she could have remained free in France, she chose to return with him based on this sacred promise, a promise she acknowledged he kept faithfully, though we remained hidden from public view throughout his lifetime. The scientific confirmation of what historical evidence had long suggested arrived in November 1998 when the journal Nature published groundbreaking DNA research comparing Y chromosome markers between Jefferson's paternal sinus lineage through his uncle Field, Jefferson's descendants, as Thomas had no acknowledged sons, and male line descendants of Eston Hemings, revealing a genetic match that established a 99.7% probability of paternity within the Jefferson male line. This molecular evidence, initially met with institutional resistance from the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, fundamentally transformed the historical conversation, forcing a formal reassessment of accounts previously dismissed as unreliable, including Madison Hemings's 1,873 newspaper testimony that generations of historians had characterized as fabrication, despite its remarkable consistency with later discovered evidence. The scientific revelation catalyzed a comprehensive archaeological investigation of Monticello's South Pavilion, beginning in 2000, yielding personal artifacts from the concealed chamber, including a distinctive mother-of-pearl button matching those on a waistcoat documented in Jefferson's Paris purchases, a handcrafted wooden bird matching precisely the small, carved finch Madison Hemings described his father making for him as a child, and most tellingly, a silver filigree locket containing intertwined locks of hair, one reddish-brown, one black, subsequently subjected to mitochondrial DNA analysis, confirming genetic markers consistent with both Jefferson and Hemings' maternal lineages. Historical researchers, newly emboldened to challenge established narratives, conducted exhaustive analysis of Jefferson's documented whereabouts throughout his post-Paris life, compiling compelling evidence that he was present at Monticello exactly 9 months before the birth of each of Sally's 7 children, including those who died in infancy, while never being present 9 months before the birth of any other child born to enslaved women at Monticello, a statistical impossibility if another man had been responsible. The final scientific refutation of the alternative paternity theory advanced by Jefferson family defenders came through sophisticated genetic analysis published in 2008, which examined potential contributions from 8 Jefferson males with access to Monticello, concluding that distinctive markers in Eston Hemings's descendants could only have originated with Thomas Jefferson himself, rather than his brother Randolph or nephews, definitively closing what historian Joseph Ellis called the most sustained act of historical denial in American scholarship. forcing even Jefferson's most devoted defenders to confront the fundamental contradiction embodied by the author of the Declaration of Independence. Maintaining an unacknowledged family with an enslaved woman for nearly 4 decades, the scientific confirmation of Jefferson's paternity triggered an unprecedented counteroffensive with the 1999 formation of the Thomas Jefferson Heritage Society, a group comprised primarily of Jefferson descendants and sympathetic scholars, whose founding charter explicitly stated their mission to defend the character of Thomas Jefferson against unsubstantiated allegations regarding his relationship with his servant Sally Hemings, despite the DNA evidence they characterized as inconclusive and subject to misinterpretation by a media eager to diminish Founding Father legacies. This modern denial represented merely the most recent manifestation of a generations-long pattern of historical gatekeeping, with prominent Jefferson biographers including Dumas Malone, Merrill Peterson, and Douglas Adair publishing influential works throughout the mid-20th century that dismissed the Hemings relationship as morally impossible, based on Jefferson's known character and principles rather than evaluating the substantial circumstantial evidence supporting Madison Hemings's claims. The systematic nature of this academic denial was dramatically exposed in 2007 when Princeton University archives released previously restricted correspondence between Jefferson biographers Julian Boyd and Dumas Malone dated September 1943, in which they explicitly agreed to omit troubling and unverified allegations regarding the Hemings woman from their scholarly works, despite privately acknowledging that certain household arrangements at Monticello raise uncomfortable questions about Jefferson's personal conduct that might diminish public appreciation of his contributions to American democracy. This remarkable letter confirmed what critics had long suspected. Influential historians had deliberately subordinated evidence to ideology, constructing what historian Annette Gordon Reed termed protective biographies that preserved a sanitized Jefferson by systematically excluding evidence contradicting their preferred narrative. The Thomas Jefferson Foundation's own conflicted response to the DNA findings revealed the power of this entrenched denial, with their initial 1998 statement expressing deep concern over unwarranted conclusions, before mounting evidence forced their reluctant 2000 acknowledgement that the preponderance of evidence suggests Thomas Jefferson fathered at least one and probably all of Sally Hemings's children, a cautiously worded admission, revealing the profound institutional discomfort with confronting the fundamental contradiction embodied by America's apostle of liberty maintaining an unacknowledged family with an enslaved woman for nearly 4 decades, a contradiction many Jefferson defenders considered too threatening to American national mythology to acknowledge regardless of scientific evidence. The most profound consequence of the DNA revelations materialized on the 14th of July 2003, when Monticello hosted an unprecedented gathering where descendants of Thomas Jefferson through his white daughter Martha Randolph stood face to face with descendants of Jefferson through Sally Hemings, bloodlines separated by 2 centuries of racial division, suddenly confronting their shared ancestry beneath the very roof where their common progenitor had maintained his parallel families. Oral histories recorded during this historic reunion revealed starkly divergent family narratives. The white Jefferson descendants had preserved stories of their illustrious ancestor as the embodiment of America's highest ideals, his character beyond moral reproach, while Hemings' descendants recalled family traditions of acknowledging their connection to Jefferson despite its denial by historians and white society. Shannon Lanier, a 7th-generation descendant of Jefferson and Hemings, described how his family maintained detailed genealogical records connecting them to the president despite official exclusion from Jefferson family organizations, noting that we always knew who we were, even when the history books said we couldn't exist. Interviews revealed how racial identity and family history had become inextricably intertwined across generations, with Beverly and Harriet Hemings's lines disappearing completely into white society, their descendants often unaware of their connection to Jefferson until DNA studies prompted genealogical revelations. while Madison and Eston Hemings's descendants followed divergent paths, with some maintaining their black identity and oral traditions, while others changed their surname to Jefferson and assimilated into white communities. Julia Jefferson Westerinen, who discovered her descent from Eston Hemings only after genealogical research prompted by the DNA findings, described the disorientation of learning that my family had been white for 5 generations, yet we carried both Jefferson's DNA and the heritage of an enslaved woman, a history deliberately hidden from us by ancestors who chose to cross the color line. The reunion crystallized America's complex racial legacy through these divided bloodlines, producing what historian Lucia Stanton termed a living embodiment of America's unresolved historical contradictions. The archaeological record provided the most tangible evidence of the Hemings-Jefferson relationship through systematic excavations conducted at Monticello between 2000 and 2015, yielding physical artifacts that contradicted 2 centuries of historical dismissal and revealed the material reality of lives deliberately obscured from written records. The South Pavilion excavations, directed by archaeologist Fraser Neiman, uncovered distinctively personal items buried beneath floorboards and concealed in wall cavities. A silver hairbrush with the initials S.H. engraved in the French style identical to items purchased during Jefferson's Paris residence. Crystal perfume bottles from Parisian parfumeries documented in Jefferson's expenditure records. A porcelain powder box containing traces of imported French facial powder specifically formulated for lighter skin tones. And most tellingly, 6 distinct sewing thimbles of graduated sizes, suggesting different users from child to adult within the same living space. Children's possessions recovered from the site directly contradicted the narrative of Sally's children as ordinary enslaved people, including intricately carved wooden animals of European craftsmanship, a miniature chess set with pieces carved from ivory and ebony that Jefferson's account books record purchasing in Philadelphia in 1797, and several slate writing tablets containing mathematical calculations and French vocabulary exercises in childlike handwriting that forensic analysis dates to the early 1800s. The most extraordinary discovery came in 2012 when renovations to the chamber's fireplace revealed a small iron box that had been sealed within the masonry, containing 6 distinct locks of hair, 1 reddish-brown, 1 black, and 4 of varying shades between, wrapped in parchment with dates corresponding precisely to the births of Jefferson, Sally, and their 4 surviving children, alongside a tarnished silver ring of French manufacture, sized for a woman's finger. Archaeological assessment of the living space itself revealed sophisticated modifications unusual for enslaved quarters, including evidence of specialized ventilation, imported French wallpaper fragments matching patterns used in Monticello's main house, and the remains of a small heating system integrated with Jefferson's innovative Monticello warming methods, all suggesting living conditions considerably more refined than those provided for any other enslaved persons on the tax plantation, and reflecting what archaeologist Gillian Gale characterized as material evidence of a woman who maintained European practices acquired during her time in Paris and whose children possessed educational materials and personal belongings reflecting a status neither fully enslaved nor truly free. The physical manifestations of Jefferson's compartmentalized domestic arrangements. The most revealing dimension of the Jefferson-Hemings relationship emerges through examination of Sally Hemings's complex family history, documented in John Wales's estate papers, discovered during a 2008 courthouse renovation in Charles City County, revealing that Sally was the biological half-sister of Jefferson's deceased wife Martha through their shared father John Wales, who had taken Sally's mother Elizabeth Betty Hemings as his concubine following the death of his 3rd wife, a relationship that produced 6 children and made Sally 3/4 European by ancestry, explaining the contemporary descriptions of her striking light complexion and physical resemblance to Jefferson's deceased wife. These estate documents contain notable discrepancies in how Elizabeth Hemings and her children were treated compared to other enslaved people in the Wales household, with inventory listings showing them receiving separate living quarters, specialized household positions, and exemption from field labor, distinctions that continued after Jefferson inherited them through his marriage to Martha Wales. The broader Hemmings family's exceptional status at Monticello appears throughout plantation records, with Sally's siblings occupying key skilled positions. Her brother James trained as a French chef during Jefferson's Paris residence. Her brother John served as Jefferson's personal attendant. Her nephew John Hemmings became Monticello's master woodworker, producing fine cabinetry. And her brother Robert supervised Jefferson's nailery operation, collectively forming what historian Lucia Stanton termed an elite enslaved family, with privileged access to Jefferson's inner circle and unprecedented testing opportunities for specialized training. The most explicit acknowledgement of these complex family connections appears in correspondence between Jefferson's daughter Martha and her husband Thomas Mann Randolph, with a letter dated 1807, explicitly referring to mother's relations still at Monticello, requiring special consideration despite their present condition, demonstrating the white family's awareness of the biological connection between the Hemmingses and Jefferson's legitimate children, a connection that made Sally not merely Jefferson's enslaved concubine but his deceased wife's half-sister, creating familial entanglements that transcended conventional categories of race and status in the antebellum South. This extraordinary biological connection offers crucial context for understanding both Jefferson's decades-long relationship with Sally and his willingness to negotiate special status for her children, suggesting that Jefferson may have viewed his relationship with Hemmings not merely as a convenient sexual arrangement, but as a complex connection to his beloved deceased wife Martha, whose deathbed request that Jefferson never remarry technically remained unbroken through his unacknowledged relationship with her half-sister. Thomas Jefferson's hidden family with Sally Hemings ultimately transcends mere historical footnote or salacious revelation, standing instead as the most profound embodiment of America's founding contradiction. A nation conceived in the revolutionary proposition that all men are created equal, yet built upon systems of racial subjugation that denied that very equality to millions. Jefferson's own writings on slavery reveal this tortured paradox, with his notes on Virginia simultaneously acknowledging that the whole commerce between master and slave is a perpetual exercise of the most boisterous passions, while also asserting fundamental doubts about black intellectual capacity and advocating colonization rather than integration, theoretical positions he violated daily in his private life through educating his own mixed-race children and maintaining an intimate relationship with a woman he legally owned yet could not publicly acknowledge. The systematic concealment of this relationship, sustained through 2 centuries of deliberate historical erasure, academic gatekeeping, and institutional denial, mirrors America's larger unwillingness to confront the fundamental contradictions embedded in its founding narrative, preferring instead sanitized histories that separate noble ideals from troubling realities. Monticello's 2018 reconstruction of Sally Hemings's living quarters as an official exhibition space marked a watershed in American historical reckoning, with the Jefferson Estate's president, Gabrielle Rauterberg, acknowledging that we can no longer present Jefferson without acknowledging the full complexity of his life, including the enslaved family that shared his home and his bloodline for nearly 4 decades. This belated institutional acknowledgement demonstrates how historical truth eventually emerges despite systematic efforts at suppression. Though the 2-century delay between Jefferson's death and this recognition testifies to the profound discomfort his personal contradictions provoked in a nation reluctant to confront its own. As visitors now enter the reconstructed space where Sally Hemings raised Jefferson's unacknowledged children, they encounter what historian Annette Gordon-Reed describes as the physical manifestation of America's unresolved historical inheritance, a space simultaneously representing intimacy and inequality, connection and separation, acknowledgement and denial. This hidden chamber ultimately reveals how America's most revered philosophical champion of liberty remained personally entangled in the very systems of subjugation he theoretically condemned. creating a legacy that continues to challenge Americans to recognize that their nation was founded not on a resolved set of principles but on fundamental contradictions that remain embedded in national identity and social structures to the present day.